Mitchell's Plain, a place where hope and hardship dance a delicate dance. A community forged in the fires of apartheid, its people carry a resilience born of struggle. But on this day, a heavy silence hung over the flats. Little Tariq Jacobs, a boy with eyes as bright as the midday sun, had vanished. 3 days ago, he had been playing outside, his laughter echoing in the narrow streets. Now there was only an echoing silence. Mothers held their children closer, their hearts heavy with a fear they couldn't name. The search began immediately, a frantic scramble to find the missing boy. Flyers with Tariq's innocent face stared back at them from lampposts and shop windows. Days turned into nights. The search continued, fueled by dwindling hope and a growing sense of dread. The community, their spirits battered but unbroken, refused to give up. Whispers started to circulate, speculation weaving its way through the streets like a venomous snake. Had Tariq wandered off? Had someone taken him? The possibilities, each more terrifying than the last, gnawed at the edges of their hope. Then a new whisper arose, more chilling than the rest. It spoke of things unseen, of darkness lurking where it should not be. It spoke of Sulfa Jacobs, Tariq's mother. Her grief, raw and all-consuming, had taken on a disturbing edge. The whispers started quietly, hesitantly, but soon became accusations. The discovery came on a day much like any other in Mitchell's Plain. The sun beat down, relentless, as if oblivious to the tragedy unfolding below. A group of teenagers, their youthful curiosity outweighing their fear, ventured into an abandoned building on the outskirts of the flats. The stench hit them first, a wave of decay that made their stomachs churn. Then they saw it. A small, lifeless form, tucked away in a dark corner. Tariq. His bright eyes were closed, his small body still. The teddy bear he always carried clutched tightly in his hand. The news spread through Mitchell's Plain like wildfire. The silence that had blanketed the community shattered, replaced by a collective gasp of horror. The police descended upon Sulfa's small apartment, their faces grim, their questions sharp and relentless. Sulfa, her eyes vacant, confessed. The community reeled. How could a mother do such a thing? How could she take the life she had brought into the world? Tariq's murder was not just a tragedy, it was a betrayal, a violation of the most sacred of bonds. As the initial shock subsided, a desperate need for understanding arose. The investigation into Sulfa's life painted a bleak and harrowing picture. Sulfa, it emerged, was a woman trapped in a cycle of poverty and despair. She had lost her job at the factory months ago and had been struggling to make ends meet. Her husband, a man broken by unemployment and addiction, offered no solace. He lashed out at her, his words like poison, blaming her for their misfortune. Sulfa, isolated and alone, bore the brunt of his anger, her spirit slowly crumbling under the weight of his abuse. The investigation revealed a history of mental health issues, a darkness that had plagued Sulfa for years. She had sought help, but the overburdened mental health system in the Cape Flats had failed her. The birth of Tariq, a beacon of light in her life, had offered a glimmer of hope. But as the weight of her circumstances grew heavier, the darkness within her deepened. She loved Tariq, fiercely and unconditionally, but her love was intertwined with a growing sense of despair. Postpartum depression, a silent thief of joy, had crept into her life after Tariq's birth. She fought against the darkness, but it was a losing battle. The joy she had once felt in motherhood became tainted with a suffocating fear. She remembered the feeling of being trapped, of seeing no way out. And she remembered the terrible moment when the darkness had consumed her. But Sulfa's story was not just a story of poverty and mental illness. It was also a story of trauma, of wounds that ran deep and refused to heal. Sulfa, like many in Mitchell's Plain, carried the scars of apartheid. Her childhood had been stolen by a system designed to oppress and divide. She had grown up witnessing the brutalization of her community, the constant threat of violence, the arbitrary arrest of loved ones. She had learned to fear the police, the very people who were supposed to protect her. The trauma of her childhood had left an indelible mark on her psyche, a deep-seated sense of powerlessness and fear. Her husband, himself a victim of apartheid's legacy, struggled to cope with the trauma he carried. He turned to alcohol for solace, his anger and frustration spilling out onto Sulfa. The cycle of violence that had plagued her community had found its way into her home. The community of Mitchell's Plain, faced with the horrific act of one of their own, struggled to come to terms with the tragedy. Some, consumed by anger and grief, demanded justice. They wanted Sulfa to be punished, to pay for what she had done. Others, their hearts heavy with compassion, saw a woman broken by circumstances beyond her control. They saw the systemic failures that had led to this moment, the poverty, the lack of mental health services, the lingering legacy of apartheid. The trial of Sulfa Jacobs was a painful and divisive affair. The prosecution presented a case of cold-blooded murder, arguing that Sulfa had acted out of malice and selfishness. The defense, while acknowledging the horrific nature of her crime, painted a picture of a woman driven to the brink by despair. They argued that she was not a monster, but a victim herself, a victim of the circumstances that had conspired to break her spirit. The courtroom became a microcosm of the community, reflecting the anger, the grief, and the desperate search for understanding. The verdict, when it finally came, was met with mixed emotions. Sulfa Jacobs was found guilty of manslaughter, a lesser charge than murder. The judge, in his sentencing remarks, acknowledged the complex factors that had contributed to the tragedy. He sentenced Sulfa to a lengthy prison term, but also ordered that she receive extensive psychological counseling and support. The sentence, a delicate balancing act between punishment and rehabilitation, reflected the complexities of the case. In the aftermath of the trial, the community of Mitchell's Plain began the long and arduous process of healing. The scars of Tariq's death ran deep, a constant reminder of the fragility of life and the devastating consequences of despair. The community came together, as they had done so many times before, to support one another, to grieve their loss, and to search for a way forward. They established support groups for families struggling with poverty and mental illness, recognizing the need for early intervention and ongoing support. They lobbied for increased funding for mental health services in the Cape Flats, determined to prevent another tragedy like Tariq's. They worked to address the root causes of poverty and inequality, understanding that true justice required more than just punishment. Through their collective grief and their shared commitment to healing, the community of Mitchell's Plain began to find a way forward. They honored Tariq's memory by working to create a better future for all their children. They recognized that the fight for justice required not just accountability for Sulfa's actions, but also a commitment to addressing the systemic issues that had contributed to the tragedy. The story of Sulfa Jacobs and her son, Tariq, is a story of profound sadness and loss. It is a story that forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about poverty, mental illness, and the enduring legacy of apartheid. The case of Sulfa Jacobs is not an isolated incident. Maternal infanticide, though a taboo subject, is a tragic reality that occurs across cultures and socioeconomic backgrounds. It is a complex issue with no easy answers, often rooted in a confluence of factors such as mental illness, domestic violence, poverty, and social isolation. The stigma surrounding mental illness, particularly postpartum depression, often prevents women from seeking the help they need. We, as a society, need to break down these barriers to create a culture where women feel supported and empowered to seek help without fear of judgment. We must also address the systemic issues that contribute to maternal infanticide. By tackling these root causes, we can create a more just and equitable society, one where all mothers have the opportunity to thrive. The tragedy of Sulfa and Tariq serves as a stark reminder of the human capacity for both love and despair.